Hey everyone, Mario again, coming at you with another review, and as you can tell, I am now on Superman 3, the 1983 superhero film directed by Richard Lester. Now this is the second sequel to the 1978 film, and of course, you guys know from my last review the history that the first couple films had. The first film, Donner, completed most of it, and he was filming Superman 2 at the same time. Then we all know, I think everyone who's a comic book fan or a movie fan in general knows this story, and I mentioned it in the last review. Well, after the success of Superman 2, Lester was given helm of another film, and you can tell with this one that he had his hand more in the pot with this film than he did with 2, because even though I haven't seen his cut of 2, from what I understand, you can see the style of both directors in the film, because Lester didn't reshoot everything. I think he reshot just stuff he had to, stuff that for his take he needed to, and the more expensive stuff he didn't. And some of it was, of course, to make up for the fact that they weren't going to use Marlon Brando's footage. But here, I could see Lester's style more in this. I haven't seen any of his other films, but his style is in here. And for the main reason is that the film is more campy and comedic, which, from what I understand, this is the tone that one of these scripts for the first film was. And after the first two films being a little bit more serious, with maybe like some slight stuff in there, but it's mostly because of the fact that when the film was made, and for the second film, at least from what I understand, Lester wanting to add some gags into it. But here you could tell it's Lester and, of course, the producer, Salkind, and, of course, the Newmans who wrote him. That's right, Newmans. Newman. David and Leslie Newman. I don't know if they're brothers or something, or I don't know if they're related or anything, but I'm just going to say the Newmans since it says they have the last name. Now, of course, with the cast, of course, Christopher Reeve once again plays Superman. Then, of course, Jackie Cooper is Barry White. Margaret Kidder as Lois Lane again. But her role is basically a cameo in this movie. And that's one thing I wondered why. Hold on, let me get just a camera. As I was watching the movie, and when I was editing the first two reviews, I actually found out why through trivia. Apparently, it's because of her criticizing the fact that they replaced Donner with Lester. So it's like, oh, you criticize us? You're only going to get a cameo. Which, I don't mind it, because she's not really important to the plot in this film, but it's one thing you notice. And, of course, Jimmy Olsen only in a couple scenes, but I think him doing that is good. And, of course, they get Annette O'Toole as Lana Lang, Clark's old high school sweetheart, who had a minor role in the first film, so I'm glad that they brought her back and they connect a little bit. Of course, she's part of one of the scenes everyone remembers where Superman takes the coal and makes it into a diamond, which I thought was pretty cool. And then, of course, we got Richard Pryor as Gus Gorman. Now, I'll say, everyone knows who Richard Pryor is and stuff. I don't think I have to go in to talk about who he is. But I will state, I have never heard any of his comedy. Waiting for the rocks. Oh, wait a minute, that's kryptonite. Why am I worrying? Oh, that's right, it can cause cancer in high amounts. I better worry. Anyway, I haven't seen any of his movies either. Okay, no one's throwing anything at that. Now, of course, I know of him. The only movie other than this one that I have ever seen that he's involved with was Blazing Saddles, because he does have a writing credit for that. Because we all know he was everyone. If you don't know the story, Richard Pryor was originally going to be in Blazing Saddles as the character Bart, but because of how his comedy was at the time, and also I think he had some drug-related problems, they decided not to go with him. But he still was collaborating a little bit with Brooks, and he got writing credit. I want to find out what in the movie is his collaboration, because that'd be interesting to know what jokes he came up with, or if any of his were actually even in the final film. Now, as Gus Gorman, I hear some people either like him or hate him. I didn't mind him. I would say he really wasn't that funny, some of his stuff, but I took it as a character quirk, so it didn't bother me. I did like that he was kind of a bumbling computer genius. It was an interesting combination, and he was semi-likable, but he's working with the villains in it, but you understand it because he's basically being blackmailed into it. And, of course, our villains, we got Robert Vaughn playing Ross Webster, who, despite the fact he's an original character, you could tell he's basically kind of based on Lex Luthor, but I guess they didn't want to get Hackman involved again, so they just made this character. I actually want to find out why they didn't get what is that? Yeah, Hackman. I want to know why they didn't get him involved again, but say for an original character, it was interesting. And we have his two assistants, Andy Ross playing his sister Vera, and then Pamela Stephenson playing his assistant and sweetheart, which I don't know if it's just me who noticed, but it seems his sweetheart is kind of based on Marilyn Monroe, at least somewhat. That's what it kind of seemed like they were trying to go with, but it could be just me. And of course we got Gavin O'Hara Lee, I don't know if the H is silent, Harley, as Brad Wilson, Lana Lang's former boyfriend. It's interesting to see him. Now, before we get into it, I must tell you how most people seem to think of this. On IMDb it has a 4.9, a big step down from the first two, and the critical thing on Rotten Tomatoes is a big step down. With the audience it's a 39, and with the critics it's a 24%. And this is what they say. When not overusing sight gags, slapstick, and Richard Pryor, Superman 3 resorts to plot points rehashed from the previous Superman flicks. Now, the slight gags and slapstick I will ignore. I sort of agree with that, because that's part of the problem I have with the film, is because, like I said, I haven't seen Lester's Superman 2. With Donner's Superman 1 and even his version of Superman 2, there's not really that much slapstick. There might be some humor in it, but it's more like situational or like dialogue type. It's not really like slapstick, and I guess that's why I see it kind of conflicts with it. And the opening slapstick, I didn't really find that funny. I mean, I got a slight chuckle out of some of it, but some of it, like the blind guy, I mean, are blind guys really that stupid? Just me or something, but... And also the fact that it doesn't have the traditional Superman opening. I guess that makes it stick out a little bit, but it's like, why did they do this? I guess Lester's decision, because Superman 4 I know has the opening credits, but oh wait, that's next. Now, like I said, I don't mind Richard Pryor, even though I hear, from what I can see and what I've heard about his other films, he's better in other films, but here I didn't mind him. And as for the plot points, I don't remember the other two films Superman dealing with an evil part of him. I know he dealt with his powers and stuff, but I thought it was interesting. Now, of course, with the whole villain thing, that I can understand, which is why I'm wondering why didn't they just recast Lex Luthor, I guess. They could have done that, but I guess this was easier. That I can understand, but me, it doesn't bug me, especially with the Superman stuff. All the stuff that bothered the film that I think makes it a step down from the first two aside, I thought it was I don't know, I think maybe decent might be the right word. It was a serviceable sequel, though. And it's one that I could actually see myself rewatching, because I thought it had some interesting ideas. Now, the plot of the movie is that we begin the film with Gus Gorman, Richard Pryor's character, who is a chronically unemployed, ne'er-do-well guy who has just been kicked off of, I don't know if it's welfare or unemployment or something, and he gets hired in a computer programming company, and he finds out he's very good at it. So, after seeing how much he gets paid, he comes up with an idea after he discovers that they like dock a half cent or something. So, he does a technique known as salami slicing, where he takes a little bit here, and he has the computer take all the half cents and give it to him, which he gets a big paycheck. Now, because of this and how he spends it, he's brought to the attention of Webster, the CEO. And Webster, he's obsessed with how computers can help you control the world, and at the time that the film came out, it probably would have seemed maybe a little far-fetched for something like this, or like futuristic. But of course, now, since we rely on computers for everything, it's slightly far-fetched, but it's a little bit more believable nowadays. So me watching it for the first time, I'm like, yeah, I believe it. And of course, Webster, he basically blackmails Gus into helping him and take over the world through money, like controlling, like putting a monopoly on coffee, and then of course on oil later in the movie. And with that, it makes him despicable, because I hate monopolies in general. If you guys know your U.S. and world history, you understand what I mean, but they're just despicable. Anyway, at the same time, Clark Kent is going to Smallville for his high school reunion. He stops a chemical plant en route from burning. Once there, he's reunited with his childhood friend Lana Lang, and they reconnect. She's a divorcee who has a young son named Ricky. You can see they're bonding. And, of course, even though I haven't seen Lester's cut of Superman 2, I do know how his cut ends, so... Either cut, I think you could probably plug into how this film goes. But you could tell he's not with Lois because of either ending. And we all know why. But here, him with Lana, it's interesting to see that. And it makes me, at the end, I actually kind of wish that they actually did get together. Maybe it's because, I don't know, it's just maybe because of how the film portrays it, but I really wish they kind of did, even though I do think that the ending of Superman 2, he should have been with Lois, but that's just me. Now, of course, Superman does kind of ruin a couple of Gus's attempts. And, of course, because of this, they decided to try to find a way to defeat him. And of course they find out what kryptonite's made out of. I'm not going to spoil it, but they don't have the last ingredient, so they just put in tar. And it basically makes kryptonite, but it's different. Instead of, weakening Superman, this kryptonite turns him evil. 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 See if anyone gets that. And it happens slowly, and of course he starts to become a jerk Superman, which I think is interesting. And this is actually one aspect of the film a lot of people praise. Not only how they did the plot, but also Christopher Reeve's performance as the evil Superman, which I will have to applaud him. He did a very good job, even more so when he starts to, saying, this is not me, and it eventually becomes a battle between good Superman and evil Superman, which this is kind of a plot point that usually is only done in fantasy stuff, like in Naruto. There's one point where he has to fight his evil side, and there's some other ones, but I think for this film it works, and even though they don't really use the John Williams score that much, if there's one moment in the movie that warranted using the John Williams score, it is after the end of the Superman versus Superman fight. And of course, makes you wonder why they didn't use Bizarro, but I think Bizarro would be an interesting villain, but I think the evil Superman thing worked. And of course, the rest of the film is how the rest... I don't think I have to go into how the rest of the film is going to go. Superman saves the day. And it, like I said, it's a serviceable sequel. Makes me wonder how Donner would have done it. Probably would have done less comedy and all that, but for what it is, I think it works. Would I get in my collection? Well, if it's cheap enough on Amazon, when I have the money, maybe, because I watched it through an AVI, that was like quality, like so-so at times, but it worked. Like I said, it's not a film I hate. I don't hate the film. I like the film. Now, the majority of the score is by Ken Thorne, and his score is okay, but the main score I really liked was the reused John Williams. Lester, his direction, it's serviceable for the film, but I prefer Donner still. I'll just see how the halfway point in Superman 2 when I see Lester's cut is, because I don't know when I'll get to that. It depends on time. Anyway, my rating for Superman 3, 3.5 out of 5 stars. Like I said, serviceable sequel. If you're a fan of Superman and you haven't seen it because of how you heard it is, I say give it a watch. And that's it. Now, of course, it's time for me to watch one of the most hated superhero sequels and one of the most hated comic book adaptations ever, Superman 4, The Quest for Peace. Or, as my friends like to call it, The Quest for Shit, a.k.a. The Quest for Money.